Hello everybody and welcome to part 2 of my Greatsword curriculum. Today we are going to move past the low cuts or the middle cuts and move to cross cuts from above. For those of you comfortable with German terminology, we will essentially be doing overhands. The difference in longsword versus greatsword overhow cutting mechanics, when I talk about it, it's not that different. However, it is not that different necessarily from what is written in the books. It's not that different necessarily from how we teach it early on. It's very different, in my limited experience, from what we actually see people do. And I think that's an important difference, and one that if you're teaching this, shows up a lot more. So firstly, I want to, when I teach this, I try to prove the point by asking people to cut to long point from a shoulder Vomtag. Or in shoulder Vomtag or even high Vomtag, cutting to long point with a greatsword is not fun, especially not with one this big. It hurts the shoulders, it will hurt your bicep. It's not particularly entertaining. If we cut to long point from a diagonal, also not very comfortable. The way I was taught to cut was always sort of from a high point through long point into a lower point. So if we start in a high Vomtag set up on the right, cut through our long point into something like a Nebenhut without footwork, so just dominant forward, and we do that with one of these, you'll overswing. You almost always hit the ground, unless you have a sword that's reasonably short for you. So there's our difference. We can't do that, right? We've shown that that's probably going to hit the ground a little bit, and if we try to stop the cut abruptly, we will hurt ourselves if we're trying to use our arms and or shoulders to stop that cut. The reality is, cutting from above with a montante has to be done with the body and needs to be stopped with the body. Now, if you look up James Clark's video on cutting mechanics with large weapons, you'll get this in a lot more detail, but we're going to do the sort of Cliff Notes version. The aim of the game is to cut with the core. The only way you can do that is by setting up the cut with the core of the rotation. Again, we'll start dominant foot forward. You set up the cut by giving yourself something to work with, and then using the release of the core to carry out the strike. It's a montante. You don't need to put oomph into it. You can just let gravity do its thing. You barely even need to use your arms. The arms are really just there to lead it in the trajectory you want. We'll get into more power afterward. Now, where you stop the cut is also with your core and finding your hip. So, I mean by that if we're wound up to cut, we're essentially going to cut into something of a plow with straight arms. And you will actually physically use your arms and your pommel hitting your hip joint, or depending on your own personal body makeup, somewhere between like upper thigh and above a sort of natural waistline, somewhere in this space, wherever your straight hand hits. So, high Vomtag, looking forward, we're turned to our right. It's a high Vomtag, chambered on the right, so not directly above, which means you're not chambered on the right, straight arms. Coil up, and you let go. You'll notice we're not cutting down with the tip, keeping the tip up. This is because in a momentum-based weapon, if we stop the momentum and we are not issuing threat in a normal situation, we lose that fight. So you're not cutting tip all the way down. The reality of it is that it's still a little unpleasant to stop there, but that's how we're going to do it. It's less unpleasant to stop there. Shoulder, chamber the cut into it in a high Vomtag on your right. Put your right foot forward, rotate body, cut into the hip joint, your bottom hand. Again, just based on keeping my arms straight, the way levers work, and some basic geometry, if that left hand stays pushed through, the tip will stay relatively up and relatively threatening, so that anyone who tried to enter at that point would impale themselves. Let's do a couple of these. Chambered, rotated, cut, up, cut, up, cut. Now you'll notice I'm trying to keep my body upright. If I chamber one of these and swing forward, I A, put my face out, and B, come a lot closer to hitting the ground, or I will in fact hit the ground. So, in the German terminology again, we have something sort of pseudo-high Vontag on the right, and we're essentially cutting into plow. But we do that by keeping straight arms and cutting only with the rotation of the core, and just letting our arms fall as long as they stay straight. We can do this same thing from the left. It's a little bit more uncomfortable from the left. Put our left foot forward. We chamber things on the left with straight arms. We rotate, cut, not as clean, right? A little bit harder because that rotation is not ending with the pommel and with your hand essentially coming to your hip, but rather at the point where your left hand, or your left arm rather, crosses your body and comes onto your body. Now I'm a bit bigger, so that point comes earlier. If you're thinner, you may actually reach the hip joint. I don't. And that's fine. This position here stops just as well, but puts a little bit more pressure on the joint. And that's fine. But that, like I did say, kills all your momentum, and the point of montante is often momentum. So get that rotation, straight arm motion down first, and then we can move on to the next bit. And the next bit is essentially to build in the transition we had from the previous video where we inverted the sword and brought it over our heads in a square motion. Do that the exact same way. Dominant foot forward, arms straight, core engaged. Cut. Use the left or the backhand if you're lefty. Use the backhand to row that forward. And once you've done that, you can bring it over your head again and prime it again in the upright position rather than bring it all the way down. Cut, invert, over, cut, invert, over. Smooth this out. I'm tipping a little because I have a bad back, so just ignore that. Okay, you'll notice my left hand doesn't quite go all the way down to here because I have a gut that gets in the way when I turn. So let's try that again. Video got interrupted. So, dominant foot forward, chambered, cut, transition, and back. Cut, invert, and transition, and we're back up. You'll notice I don't quite go all the way down because I have things that are in the way if I try to bring that through there. So you'll end up using a little bit of that complement to move your sword rather than stopping it entirely. But the basics are still there. The basic mechanic is the same. Again, same is true on the left. From the left, right? We're here, we're setting it up with the dominant foot forward, rotating our core, cutting, bringing the left hand forward to unwind, and bringing it over for the next cut. And I encourage you not to hold your breath when you do that. So now we have cuts from both sides. And we can begin to flow those together a little bit. Now I find the switching from right to left works better on the low cuts than it does on the high, just to have swing back and forth on the bottom. But rather than cutting from one side to the other and inverting all the way over, you cut from one side to the other and invert partially. You'll cut from your right, and I'm going to take more of a horse stance here because I'm not going to be switching feet between cuts. I will go one and cut to here. Okay, so from here, cut, invert, up, cut, invert, up, cut, invert, up. And I can do cut comfortably. Again, like in the last video, I encourage you to break that down into multiple parts. First the cut, then the inversion, and then the motion to get to the next cut. Whether it's all the way over to start from the same side, or halfway over to start from the opposite side. And again, we can do a 4-cut little flow here. We can cut from the right, invert, reset on the right, cut from the right, invert, reset on the left, cut from the left, invert, bring it up, cut from the left, invert, bring it to the right. Again, trying to keep a straight arm with all of the stuff you're doing the entire time. Okay, so now that we've done a little bit of the flow, X cuts from above, we've done one with the middle cuts, I suggest switching between the two. What order you do this in is irrelevant. It's just about learning to switch and transition. So our transition point from a high cut to a low cut comes in the same transition as you'd expect, and you just bring the arms around one. So we start with a right-handed cut from above, we cut, we invert, we bring it all the way around, and now we have a middle cut. We can also invert within the low cut, the same way we did before by switching sides. We start from a cut from the right, transition around, cut to the left, now we're from the left, and we can convert, pull again to the left, we can also convert up into a high left. So we can go from low to high, transition, low from the right, cut, transition down from the left, low from the left, transition, high from the left, transition. And we can start over again. High right, low left, high left. Just one way to do this transition is in practice. And then you can always just start from the other side. So if you build all those in, we now have a reasonable flow at the low cuts. We have a reasonable flow from the high cuts. We have a reasonable flow switching between all of them. And that is part 2. Keep in mind this whole time to keep your legs loose, to keep your core engaged, to keep your arms straight. And always think about where your cross guard is so you don't brain yourself with the sword.